Alright, YouTube, if you believe in Keck and memetics at all, then you know that major gets on a major website like 4chan on any of its boards do actually matter because they drive human mentality. And the 100 millionth get for 4chan's politically incorrect was no exception to this. Now, there are technically two gets. There's, of course, 99,999,999, and then there's 100 million. And they were both in a row. The latter got much more attention because it actually was a political post. And that post was quite simple. Fuck leftists. It is a harbinger of the era to come, essentially, in the next few years of politics. It's also one that's basically a self-fulfilling prophecy. The left is, the neoliberal left anyway, with its wedge issues, is getting hammered across the board. We see it in the Philippines, we see it in South Korea, we see it in parts of Africa and Hispanic lands of the world. We certainly see it in Europe, all over the place, Eastern or Western. We've seen it here in the US. We're beginning to see it in Canada. Trudeau's losing steam. Hobbit-faced Trudeau with the glass jaw, he's starting to lose out support and basically go into a tailspin. So yeah, it is happening. It had an image of some Polish soldier who was a severe anti-communist. Apparently he's like, oh, I never killed anyone, communists aren't people, or something like that. I thought that was very, very funny. Some South African tried to do a Jill Stein post to steal the get, but they failed. And so now people are applauding. It was an American poster that got 100 million, and it was a Polish image, which couldn't be better. You couldn't sum up the current feeling of the actual alt-right, as opposed to like the two Jewish dudes there doing the Sieg Heil salute with Tila Tequila, which I find very funny that people aren't seeing through that. That's not the alt-right. Those are people who are hucksters. The alt-right is civic nationalism, largely. These people claiming that it's racial nationalism are either agent provocateurs or they're racial nationalists seeking to co-opt a much larger and more successful movement's name. Ramsey Pauls pointed this out, and that's basically getting it from one of the highest tier people who would be considered alt-right that you could possibly get it from. I don't care about like the Daily Storm and Shoah sort of stuff. I don't have a problem with them. I don't have a problem with racial nationalists, largely. If they're law-abiding, if they're peaceable people, I don't really care. And that includes like black nationalism, La Raza, or anything like that. But I'm a civic nationalist. I think it's more about culture. People need to assimilate. Cultures should defend themselves. There's something wrong with people who don't think that a culture should defend themselves. It's not how human history has been lived for the last 100,000 years. It's only in the last century that you get cultures that are suicidal enough to think that's a good idea. But that is the prevailing notion of our time. The neoliberal left is dying off. And because its growth is outpacing it, the far left is also being challenged as well. For a while there, for some decades, a far leftist could at least be tolerated. They might be seen as fringe, as a little bit nutty, perhaps, by the mainstreamers. But they weren't considered dangerous, unless they were an out-and-out, literally they wear red and they march down the street with their, cheap rip-off Soviet armament or something like that, unless they're actually doing something specifically violent, in which case they're usually trying to false flag somebody else anyway, let's face it. They weren't considered too dangerous. They were considered tolerated, especially by the youth and by the neoliberal parties, especially in Europe. You see, like Merkel, she does nothing. A group of anarchists and commies get together, start hurling Molotov cocktails. The police just sit by and let them burn themselves out. You have a couple of nationalists, they march down the street just carrying a flag, not doing anything. The police come and beat them to a bloody pulp. That's beginning to change. It's beginning to change because the so-called far right, which includes racial nationalists, civic nationalists, nativists, populist movements, workers' parties, even some that do honestly lean left in some ways, they're all gaining so much dominance that it's become expedient for those political movements that are still the establishment to actually court them. That's why we see this in the United States. People like Bannon, oh, he's not a Nazi. Bannon's not a Nazi, he's an alt-righter. There's a big difference between the two. The mischaracterization in the legacy media of the alt-right as literal skinheads is laughable. I've spoken with many people who take up that banner Some of them are civic nationalists, some are racial nationalists. But they're not Nazi stormtroopers by any means. I think you'd find that some of their ideologies you'd have in common with a group like the Black Panthers or something. I don't see them being labeled a hate group by the media. So it's very, very funny to me. But yeah, this 100 millionth post, yeah, it sort of tells you what the prevailing notion is in our current time period. The right is rising. Civic nationalism, libertarianism, ANCAP mentality, you could say, certainly is increasing in its power. Syndicalism, some of these other far-left groups that nonetheless have something in common with some of the more liberty-loving groups or the more nationalistic groups, yeah, they're rising too. Fringe ideologies, so-called, are the ones rising right now. Centrist ideologies are the ones dying off. Very quickly, too. It doesn't matter, really, what they're replaced by. Arguably, the American Commie Party would arguably have more common sense in at least some aspects than like the idiots that run the country now. It's really a sad reflection how bad globalism truly is, that that's really the case. To the point where, you know, again, you literal skinheads, they make more sense on some issues than these retards that we have in DC right now. And this is the case all over Europe. It's the case in Asia and stuff. You look at India, people put up like portraits of Adolf Hitler all the time and sell like Hitler ice cream, Hitler shirts, Hitler shoes, and so forth. Nobody has a problem with it. Nobody cares. You have some comedy in Turkey. It's about Hitler in teaching a school class or something. It's supposedly hilarious. This is what you have all over the world right now. It's become satire. It's become something that's honestly considered amusing. I understand why, because honestly, with as bad as globalism is, you look at the problems in the world today, all of which were caused by neoliberals and neoconservatives, or 99% of the problems were. Then groups like, you know, communists or Nazis or something, yeah, they're humorous. They caused a lot less death and destruction than the people that are in charge now. It wasn't Adolf Hitler or Joseph Stalin that killed 500,000 Iraqis and led to thousands of U.S. soldiers dying and tens of thousands more coming back with PTSD and all sorts of injuries. They're not the ones that marched them off to war. They're not the ones that screwed up Libya. It wasn't Hitler that did that. It wasn't Mussolini who destabilized Afghanistan. People are starting to notice this. And the people are so worried about some political group that caused death and chaos 100 years ago, and yet they would willfully ignore, especially in the legacy media, some group that exists today causes just as much chaos. It's just that it's covert warfare. It's drone-based, or assassination-based, or it's based on embargoing some country until it falls into civil war and chaos or something like that. Whether it's left or right-leaning, it doesn't make any difference. I'm glad that the left, the old guard sort of neoliberal left, is dying. Just as I'm happy when the neocons lose power. I don't care if any of the neocons in the Republican Party are reelected. I don't care if there's a Democratic supermajority. If you get an actual leftist movement in the Democratic Party, or a JFK-style, you know, populist movement, oddly, then yeah, the Democratic Party would be better than the Republicans. The Republicans follow mild reform of Trump populism / kind of nativism, or they go back to the Ike days or something like that, then yeah, I'd let them take every position. They'd be so much better. Right now, though, we still have two tired old parties espousing tired old ideologies, tired old policy ideas, and nobody really knows or cares anything about, causing a lot of problems here and overseas, and you see it happening the world over. They're beginning to lose power. Good riddance. That's about all. Peace out.